break last week. If you got a break, I know one of our alumni, Alex, I don't see him on here, runs an e-commerce store, and so did not have much of a break as he was rolling out new features right before Black Friday. So yeah, hopefully you got a chance to rest. I want to welcome everyone here to our fireside chat with Sean Wang, aka Swix. Sean, how are you today?
Really good. Excited that so many people are here and a little bit nervous now.
So before we kick off, can you tell us a little bit about the nickname Swix? Where did that come from?
Oh, it's an easy one. In Singapore, I'm from Singapore, and I'm calling to all of you from Singapore. We have English and Chinese names, as I guess the Singaporean Chinese. So Sean Wang is my English name, and then it goes into Wang Yuexian on the Chinese side. And since I was a kid, we always a friend of mine just put all the initials together, and it says Swix. It's pronounceable and it's unique, so I just kind of adopted it as my online persona.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's like built-in branding right there.
Oh, it's free. Yeah, it's amazing. The only problem is some some email services don't let you register four-letter usernames,
Oh,
so that's
interesting.
a little annoying.
Nice. Well, welcome. We're really excited to have you here. Um, and just as a quick introduction for everybody, Sean Swix is actually a boot camp graduate. Went to a similar program as you all went to, and that was just 3 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, November 2017 is when I graduated.
Yeah, and has really made a name for himself in the industry, um, and uh, just released a book in July called the Coding Career Handbook, which helps student students. I'm an instructor, so I'm used to saying students. Helps developers, because you're all developers, such as yourselves, grow in your careers. And so I'm really excited to have Sean here to talk us through his experience and his expertise in that area. And he's going to give us a presentation for about 20, 25 minutes or so. During that time, please jump onto the Slido that we posted in Slack to ask questions, because for the rest of the hour, it'll be kind of a Q&A time um, between you all and Sean. So without further ado, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, that was awesome. As an awesome intro, Dustin. So thanks so much for that. And yeah, thanks to everyone for having me on and taking some time out of your day. Um, I guess the one correction I would have is that the book is actually very focused in on like the junior to senior transition, which is why I'm pretty excited to speak to Lambda School alums, because I know all of you are in some form of that phase, and I'm arguably still going through it as well. The only reason why I feel like I have any credibility writing this is because at some level there's a lot of debate as to like what constitutes a senior developer. um, but at some level I think the main points are you get paid like a senior developer and you get the senior in your title. There are other more practical qualifications, but I think those are some parts of that that are
It's
relevant
a
to me.
resume booster.
The other thing as well is that this advice doesn't just come from me. It really is all the collective advice I've collected over the past 3 years from people who are much smarter, and much more experienced than I am. So uh, consider this a curation of other people's advice, like the best of. Um, some One of my reviewers said it was like the best of Hacker News, and yeah, it doesn't just come from me. I just represent some ideas that have worked. So yeah, I'm just gonna jump right into it, and don't worry about taking notes or stuff like that. I mean, obviously take notes if you want, but I'm gonna share all these slides later, so you can click on the links and stuff like that later on. And I should probably also set a timer so that I know that I don't run out of time. All right, cool. Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and walk you through. So just a little bit about me. So I used to work in finance. I'm a career changer myself. And I basically did 6 months of free code camp in early 2017, just as on a trial basis, just to see if I could do this dev thing. Went into Full Stack Academy. I'm kind of wearing their shirt here. So 3-month boot camp, and then started at Two Sigma in 2018. Was there for 6 months. The job didn't really work out, and fortunately had enough of a presence online that I actually got a job at Netlify. Probably a bunch of you already use Netlify. I'd love to hear your feedback about it. And recently this year made the jump to AWS, where I work on AWS Amplify. Today we're actually having AWS reInvent, which is our big annual developer conference. So quite a few launches that you're going to be seeing coming out from the AWS news channels. I'm also an instructor on egghead.io. That's where I do a bunch of courses on React and TypeScript. I was until recently a r/React.js moderator. So there's like 200 over 1,000 of us talking about React. If you want to stay sharp on React and just give back to the community, that's a great place to check it out. I also like Svelte because one framework's not good enough. And I also am a big proponent of this idea of learning in public. So I guess we're going to have some questions about that later on. I've given us a bunch of talks that you may want to check up on, particularly in the React field. But those are more about React internals. And recently I've been focused more on things that are surrounding React, like the React community and then React tooling. So for example, I maintain the React and TypeScript cheat sheets that you might use if you use any TypeScript in your day-to-day work. So happy to talk about that as well. Just to talk about the book. So, I mean, I feel a little bit awkward here because like, a lot of you might not have read it. A lot of you might never read it. And I don't need to sell you the book. I just want to express the problem space that I see, and you can decide how important this advice is, how relevant this advice is to you. So I think that there's a lot of books about cracking the coding interview, and then there's a lot of books about architecture, code patterns, like pretty senior stuff. And the hole in the market that I perceived was that there was nothing addressing the junior to senior gap. Like what happens after you crack the coding interview? What happens after you get the job? People are surprisingly silent about that. So the structure of what I decided, the way I decided to tackle this was to have principles, things that are just kind of always with you throughout your coding career, strategy, ways to help decide the major turning points in your career, and then tactics, the small tactical things that you might do to improve your day-to-day job. So that's what I see the qualitative difference is between the book that I worked on, which is kind of like a longitudinal career book, versus a lot of other books that are out there, which are very focused on a single point in time and helping you get across admittedly a very important thing, like getting that job. You don't have a career if you don't get that job. But I think it's helpful to have a guide or a handbook that just stretches across an important period of your life. And this is the book that I wish I would have. Okay, so the first part is kind of a career guide. I think this was designed for people who aren't necessarily at your stage. This is kind of like an explainer for people just getting into coding careers. So I don't have to dwell too long on this. The first insight that I really had was this idea of career layers. And it kind of answers the question of why, like what are all the people who work as software engineers or who are employed making software? What do they do, and how come some interview sections or how some interview formats are so different from the others? The main genesis of this idea came from this concept. Like when I graduated from boot camp, I was told like I need to drill all these system design algorithms. It never really got tested in my in my interviews. Like I basically had one system design question for Moat, and that was about it. Even for Google, there was a lot of whiteboarding, there's a lot of algorithm stuff, but then in all the other interviews that I ever did, even including interviewing for AWS, I never really got those questions. I got more practical questions about frameworks and like building projects and take-home projects and stuff like that. And so I think what the reality of the situation is, like the kind of interview you do basically differs by what kind of layer of the stack you're working on. And I kind of break it out like this, and you can see all these little details here. But it broadly breaks down to platform versus product. So this is what you might traditionally consider front end, right? The people who work on user experience, and then the people you might consider back end are people who work on, scaling, working on cloud stuff. But then there's also backend as a term is so complicated because right now there's so many parts of the backend, and really, I don't know. Like I consider I don't think the terminology of front end and back end works very well anymore, because when you create services, you're technically working on a back end, but you're aligned towards a product. Whereas when you work on a platform, you kind of don't really care what the product is. You just want to build a platform that scales really well. So that's kind of the terminology that I think people are evolving to. So instead of front end engineer or back end engineer, I think the job titles are switching towards product engineer or platform engineer. And I think the last point I'm going to make about this coding career layers, I think a lot of people have, especially for software engineers, have a lot of concerns about how no code is going to affect or compete with their careers. And I would basically say not to worry, because no code and low code solutions essentially form that final layer at the top, where they're going to be the most, as you go up the stack, there's going to be more and more people who have access to that layer. But you're never actually going to be competed with on that layer, because you're as a developer, you're working within applications or services, maybe lower down if you really get to it. But most bootcamp graduates are focused on the applications and services bit. So that's kind of how I lay out coding career layers. Be happy to chat with you more on this thesis. It's a very, very broad thesis, and I'm not sure I did it justice here, but whatever. The other thing about interviewing, again, hopefully most of you have jobs already, but I also like to drop the statistical fact. This is kind of the inverse of the birthday problem if you have played with it in probability. But I really like this quote from Hasib Qureshi, where he says, if you have a 4% chance of getting an offer, just mathematically applying it 50 times is going to give you an 87% chance of getting one job offer, which is another way of saying it's a numbers game. And applying to more places are great. And this is the kind of career guide advice I think people really need as they kind of go through their journey. So again, I kind of lack context here as to where you guys are. Some of you might already be in jobs. Some of you might have just graduated Lambda School. So I don't know where you are in the journey. And I'd be happy to talk to you about my thoughts on job hunting. You definitely see people taking that numbers game thing way too much. 200 applications, 300 applications. I only applied to 9 jobs. And I think when you make it narrow, you can focus in on the jobs that you really want. And I definitely, that's something that I prefer more, but certainly other approaches work for other people. The other thing I think that most authors and most advice givers don't focus enough about is the time split while you search for a job, because you're not always drilling algorithms that I would just go nuts if I did that day in and day out. So you do need some sort of split, and you do need some advice around that. So I'm happy to give that to you if you want it. I'm just going to move on because we have so much to cover. And I think people kind of go really nuts with the whole portfolio approach. Like everything has to be gorgeous and everything. You only need that if you're trying to go for some sort of designer developer type of role. And there are a lot of jobs that are not that. And I think something I really like from Meko Okereke, he's a hiring manager at Google. He really says you only need 3 contributions. You need something simple, something complete, and something with a story, kind of how you might do to get married. But essentially, I think that's really true. Like people spread themselves super thin and they don't really have a compelling story sometimes if they don't work on the range of projects that gives that depth to their experience. So I really encourage you to spread out your portfolio, not in terms of like design, because I mean that's one way to do a portfolio, but more in terms of being able to tell a compelling story to a recruiter. So we'll talk about that in later on if we want. Referrals are also a really compelling way to get in. I'm not saying something that's groundbreaking here, but I really like this image from my friend Gergely Oros. He's a hiring manager at Uber, where he really spells out for you like how far you get ahead if you can get a referral of all the filtering and other resumes. Like, to me, ultimately, the point that I want to get everyone at is where your resume is not where your job application starts, it's where it ends, because it's a formality. People already made up their mind to hire you before they ask you for your resume. That's what happened to me for my last 2 jobs, and I think that it's a really great position to be in, because resumes are a very lossy compression algorithm, right? We have all our experience and all our quirks and all that. We expect to serialize that down to this single piece of paper. We hope that the other person on the other end has the deserialization algorithm to unlock our awesome value, and they just quite frankly don't. It's just a terrible communication format, extremely lossy. And what's much better if we get a warm referral. So let's try to do that if we can. All right. I also like this idea for people. So I have a very front end bias, and I think a lot of us would have a natural front end bias. So I like to highlight examples of people getting into cloud and getting to back end, if possible. I really like this initiative from Forrest Brazil, who is a AWS hero, which is like a community recognition program. And the Cloud Resume Challenge has gotten jobs, and it really just goes through and demonstrates your ability to learn the cloud. And if you do that, he will open up his network to hire you. And I think that's a really fair trade. I wish more people did it. But there are a lot of ways to get the job. And I just wanted to open your minds as to the kind of things that you can be doing to get your job. I'm going to skip this, but being able to pitch yourself on Twitter is a skill. That means squeeze everything about you into 280 characters. This was extremely effective, and you should look for more examples of that. And I can give you more examples if you want. All right, enough about Twitter. Here are some resources about system design and algorithms. Again, like I don't know where you guys are at, so I don't know if this is relevant to you or not, but I can talk about them more if you want. But I'll share the slides with you if you want those resources just on their own.
Sorry, I haven't given context, but I would say most of those joining today are in their first or second job.
Yeah, I mean, it's still helpful for interviewing, but less important than that. But I'm happy to share this with you via the slides or in the book. All right. Then we come to like the junior to senior dev part, which is probably where a lot of you are. And I think here there's a lot of advice that's kind of all over the place. And I basically read through everyone's advice. and so I think you get a lot of perspective. I was kind of joking a little bit earlier about like just getting the senior title and getting getting paid. Probably the 2 most relevant qualifications for senior that I've seen, which everyone agrees on, is that 1, you're able to independently ship. So kind of the buck stops with you. If I hand you something, I have reasonable confidence that you're going to be able to take care of that task. That's a sizable task. Or if it's above you, you're not going to keep it to yourself. You're actually going to forward it, or you're actually going to throw an exception, right? You're going to say like, hey, I don't have this. I'm going to need more firepower, and that's great, because then I can trust you even more to actually handle things when you say you're handling things. The other aspect which quality which people really like is that the seniors live their team up. Like, so they're not just like this mythical 10x engineer that does everything by themselves. You're actually lifting the rest of your organization. You're doing mentoring, and you're designing, documents and architecture that lasts. So I really like that. So there's obviously a ton more in the junior to senior dev section, but that's all we have time for. And mostly, I think something that I really like in terms of like thinking about your coding career journey is like there's only so much knowledge that can be written down in books and docs and talk. But then there's a lot that you pick up over the course of your career that really cannot be written down, or people don't want to write down. And that's a lot of like experience, design patterns, business context, stuff like that. So a lot of senior experience or senior engineering, if that's a term, is the accumulation of tacit knowledge, and that's a quality that you can have. But I think something that people overly rely on is their ability to hold their tacit knowledge in their head, and just build a brand of, and just trust that people, first of all, can access or know that they have that tacit knowledge, right? When you interview, you have to convey that tacit knowledge, that you have that expertise. And second of all, trust that you can access your own prior experience if you don't spend the time to write it down or organize it. So a lot of what I preach is to just write things down more, and it's a function of you organizing your thoughts so that you can actually structure them and access them better. But then also it helps other people discover you, so that it basically serves as a form of marketing for your skills. So basically turn tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge, and the economy will reward you. I think that's a very fundamental law of how this industry works. Okay, let's talk about principles. The one that I'm best known for is learn in public, but we'll get there. But just, I think even if you don't agree with a single one of my principles, but I think you should have some principles in the first place. And that really derives from when you make mistakes or have great success, you should write them down. You should form them into a system, and don't leave that to chance, or don't leave that to sort of selective memory. And the more you can accumulate a set of principles and harden them over time, and have and really test out the edge cases and understand how they apply and improve your life, I think you'll be better off, because you have built a system that you don't have to decide these things anymore. That's just the way you are going forward. So that's the one I'm best known for, learning in public. This one I actually got. So a lot of people think I might have come up with it, but I actually got this from Kelsey Hightower, and I'm sure he got it from somewhere else. The earliest instance I can find of people actually using this term is NASA actually using it to create sort of more knowledge sharing in their organization. So it's not a new concept, but I generally think it's the fastest way to learn for a lot of reasons, primarily because you put skin in the game. You have you have more active engagement with your learning, and you also get to build your network while you learn and while you grow your knowledge. And I think that's a very powerful thing. I've spent way too much time thinking about it, so I'm happy to share more with you as well. There are a lot more principles that I kind of go over in the book. One I really like is this idea of open sourcing your knowledge. So if you believe in the power of code, open source code to be qualitatively better and crowdsourced over time compared to closed source code, then the same thing can be done to open sourcing knowledge. And that's something that that's really changed my life. I've been taught TypeScript by the TypeScript team at Microsoft, by Uber, by Airbnb, because I open source my TypeScript knowledge. And just having the vulnerability and the lack of ego to say, this is the state of things, and I'm open to criticism, lets people come in and teach you and collectively build a resource together. And I think that's something that has really helped me grow faster than the traditional number of years of experience that people judge you by. And I think that's something that's pretty compelling as well. There was supposed to be more here. I think I screwed up my animations. Anyway, strategy. Let's talk about strategy. Strategy is the least popular section of everything I talk about. Developers kind of view themselves as, I do code, and maybe I do the learn in public, and that's it. And I think you're not well served by not having a clear understanding of strategy, because that's a lot. I think it's a myth that everything is an infinite game. There are certain key points in time where you have to make irreversible major decisions in the face of uncertainty. So it really helps you to prepare for that and have strategic awareness. So that's kind of why I focus so much on strategy. I also have an obsession with business, sort of the business of tech. Like, how do people make money with the code that you write? I think imagine working at Google, but then working on Google Plus, and not really caring about what you work on, and I don't think anyone wants to be like that. So understanding the broader business context of what you work on helps you be more effective, and quite honestly, that's how you're evaluated as well as a senior engineer. And I'll show you some proof later on. So there's learning strategy, there's career strategy, and then there's tech business strategy, which we'll talk about later. A lot of people want to. It's very fashionable right now to fancy yourself as a T-shaped person. That's your learning strategy, right? You want to be good at all the things, but then really good at one thing. I argue that everyone is T-shaped. So in making this statement, you're not saying anything of substance. So that's my criticism of that. Hot takes. And this is and in the course of creating the career strategy sort of chapters, I really studied and basically every single public career ladder out there. And if you look at all the career ladders, it's pretty interesting, because technical knowledge is only about a quarter of all the evaluation criteria that are out there. The rest is execution, communication, and influence. That's not something they teach you in Lambda School or any school. And I think that's something that people are very surprised when they switch from the what their idea of code is when they're learning the code into doing code for a living, because it turns out that you're not defined as purely a programmer. You're basically a code enabled human, and people evaluate you like that. Like you have to have good communication skills, and that's basically the equal weight to technical knowledge. And understanding this basically fills out the picture for why you need the soft skills and everything else we talk about, especially in the tactics section later on. Okay, tech strategy is the one I left towards the end. So tech strategy is how people make money from your code, and I go into a lot of detail about how industries start vertical and then go pivot to horizontal, as well as all the business models that you might be working in, and how to decide the health of whatever company you're working in on. Obviously, I'm not an expert on that. I have studied this for a while, and I did invest in tech companies during my finance careers. But I think a lot of this is going to be new content for developers, and I think it's worthwhile content, because this is where all your the fates of your products are decided. And I don't know, I think you should be naturally interested in that. Okay, I'm just going to skip all this because I'm running out of time. Okay, tactics I think is important in the sense that it's the day-to-day items that really help you succeed in your current job, or I guess when you're getting that job, particularly with negotiating. One of my most popular projects, which is kind of open source knowledge again, is this Spark Joy repo, where I accumulate all the design for developers tools and courses and stuff like that. So that's one of the chapters in there as well. Even a workplace tactic like lampshading is a really interesting concept that I love sharing with people. Like the idea that you don't have to know everything, and that you can gain power by admitting ignorance is something that's very counterintuitive, but then it's actually true once you start your first job. So I really like sharing that as much as I can. Okay, writing, important. I have thoughts on how to write more. I don't have time to explain it. As well as marketing itself, this is probably one of my most popular chapters, and I've done a couple talks on that as well. I can send it to you. The last part of the book I think is really important, because we spent a lot of time talking about principles, strategies, and tactics, but that's very much like, imagine if you were given on a silver platter from like the word of God, the absolutely correct principles, strategies, and tactics. Like maybe I'm wrong, right? But like, imagine you had the perfect advice. Do you have the wherewithal or the system to absorb that and actually implement that in your life? And I think that really led me down a dark path, because like, if I did not write about this, then everything I talked about before that is meaningless, because you don't have a system to operate it, and you don't have a way to think about how all of this actually fits in your life. So I kind of call this the operating system of you, because it basically applies between the software and hardware interface, how much we basically how do I phrase this? Like, we have limited hardware. Like, we have what we've been born with, and we need to run as many programs as possible on it. So we need to have some sort of scheduler to sort of time slice between different programs. We need to work with external devices, for example, our note-taking devices, so we can sort of offload our storage. We need to work on our physical health, like our like the body temperature. If you can think about like your CPU. So this is an analogy that I really like. And I think the final point that I always try to make at the end of all this conversation is this idea of your drive. Like, if you lose that, which is comparable to the kernel in your operating system, like if you lose that, then everything else doesn't matter. And that's where a lot of people burn out. And I have a bunch of examples on also some Hacker News or Twitter, where people burned out of really well-performing software engineering careers. And I think you need to keep that motivation for coding and your love for creating software alive to stay in the field. So I think it's worth talking about it. I think it's worth talking about emotions and how they're valid, and normalize talking about your emotions. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about all of that, but also, I've done a specific talk on the operating system review, so you can check that out as well. That's it. That's a woven tour. I just wanted to leave more time for questions. So that's the rough like table of contents that we can talk about here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's what I call a good teaser. So you gotta go get the book if you want to learn more.
That was so hard.
No, that was so good. And there's a lot that I think we can touch on. We already have a few questions.
All right. Let's do
so
this.
For everybody who's on with us, go to the Hired Alumni channel to jump onto Slido. If you have questions, you can post them on Slido. Also upvote, because if we get too many questions and we can't cover all of the questions in the time, we're going to take the most upvoted questions first. So as you all are jumping onto Slido, upvoting, looking at questions, I have a quick question to kick us off. That very first illustration that you showed, the longitudinal, you know which one I'm talking about.
Am I sharing my screen? I am, right?
Number 3. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what your opinion is on why there's the why is there a gap in that between that junior developer to the senior developer of information, of how do we get from here to there? Why isn't that covered more in the industry?
Yeah, this is the same reason I wrote the book in the first place, is because no one stops to write it down. When you're in this process, when you hit senior, you're very focused on the next stage. And once you're at the next stage, you're kind of uninterested in you're so far away from the junior to senior transition that you're kind of uninterested in writing anything about it. So it takes someone who's just done it to write it down.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's the whole beauty of learning in public. You just went through that process and you're like, hey, other people need to see this, so I'm gonna write it down. Whereas most people are at that senior dev level thinking, okay, now how do I what's my next step?
Which is totally fair, right? It's just that like there's a reason why most of the information contained within here, it's just like, one-off anecdotes and like random comments left somewhere. No one takes the time to write it down because it's not like a prestigious thing to do. People much rather write the get the interview done. Like, that's a much more measurable thing. Like, this is not at all an easy thing, because what the hell is your success criteria? I don't know, but like, at least this one, like, is like, oh yeah, I read this book and got the job. Hey, you should buy this book. Like, that's a very clear value add. But this is a very weird space to be in, and I think no one really tried to tackle it.
yeah, I love that. Okay, so our first question: for someone just starting off in their career, any recommendations on what we should be focusing on to grow professionally?
Whoa, that's so broad.
It is.
I mean, in a way, everything I just talked about is kind of my way of answering that. That said, I would really want to acknowledge the role of career ladders. So again, this is the post that I yep, love using Google as my personal search engine. Yeah, so like study whatever company you have. If you're above 50 people, you should have a career ladder. If not, you should demand one, and you should have an active role in forming your own company's career ladder. It's very advantageous for you to do that. I had a chance in doing that. It's great, but probably you have one, and so study them. So, for example, like this is your company telling you what they value in an engineer, right? Like you should really take the hint, because like it's super annoying to be surprised by this at like promotion time or evaluation time. This is Circle CI. This is one of the most technically sort of hardcore engineering companies in the world, right? So you have no excuse, like when you join the company, not to know that, hey, they really value software design and architecture, and this is kind of what they expect out of their engineers. They're one of the only companies I studied that has security as part of the evaluation criteria. So you better believe that you should know a thing or two about security, and actually practice that and have proof points to demonstrate that when it comes time for your annual review or promotion. And so really, like, study the game that you're played. Every company has a different ladder, slightly different ladder. I mean, everyone has kind of like the same, like, oh, you should have some good communication, oh, you should have some leadership. Everyone has some vague, broad, similar criteria. But study the one that you have, because that's the one that you really are going to be evaluated by. That's game. Okay, there's a connection between game and metagame. Game are the rules of the game. Game in my language basically represents the rules of the game as they're given to you today. Metagame is how are the rules of the game changing, right? And that's very much like skate to where the puck is going. You're not going to stay at your current company forever, and you're going to need to decide and take ownership of what you want your career to be. And it's not your manager's responsibility to decide that for you. You have to do it for yourself. And I think a lot of learnings that I've spoken to, like I'm releasing a podcast tomorrow with the CTO of Calm, and he's like, yeah, more engineers should take charge of their own career paths. So hopefully that helps. Like, study the game and the metagame.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good. Kind of a follow-up question that goes with another question we got. Where did that one go? Might have been deleted. So there was a question someone asked that they feel more front-end oriented, but got a job as a Java backend engineer. Is part of that metagaming idea is if you're in a position that you don't see yourself in long-term, maybe even less than a year or two, then what would your focus be?
So, I mean, this person's already decided that they want to go more front end. I mean, which is a good thing. You should know what you want. I'd say like it's easy. So one of the tricks is that it's always easier to transfer within a company than from outside. So like, for example, it's always easier to volunteer to do front end work within your existing company than it is to try to sell yourself as a front end engineer without having done any other front end projects to a new company that's completely new to you. It's just this weird thing that we have where we trust people that we already hired more than we trust people we haven't hired yet, even though it's completely arbitrary and you have the same exact person. So I think, as much as possible, try to work on that pivot within your existing company, and then you kind of seal the deal the moment you leave and get the same position in a different company. Hopefully that answers the question. I actually advocate for this a lot in the transition from junior to senior as well, because as a senior, you kind of, especially at companies like Google, you kind of need like a project that proves you have attained that rank. And so you kind of want to maneuver yourself, like you want to maneuver yourself to that point where you want to have your career making project. in that space that you want to specialize in. So you rather spend some time, hopefully not longer than 2 years, maneuvering yourself to that ideal industry or ideal subdiscipline that you really want to do in, and then becoming senior there, because that's a big part of your story going forward, like that you were the person who did X at such and such company, and you're expected to have that level of impact as a senior. It's much harder to do this. It's much harder to do that transition once you are a senior. I think ultimately though, these are micro optimizations. Like we're really talking about like the first 5 to 8 years of your career. If you intend to have like a 20, 30 year long career, and I've had conversations with engineers like that, then you're just going to have, the opportunity to work up and down the stack wherever you want. And, and so never say never. And I think whenever you feel like you're stuck in a small iterated game, then just zoom out, and you'll be doing fine.
That's a great perspective, that these are
like
micro
this guy,
optimizations.
Mark, what's his name? Mark Volkman. I just want to show you, okay, like, because you're surrounded by people who haven't had that long careers. Then you look at someone like this who has coded since 1999. He's done Groovy, Java, Ruby tools, Antler, which is no longer around, jQuery, Clojure, REST, Swig, like it's just up and down the stack all over. And that's what a long career looks like. Like you aren't that pigeonholed. And if it feels like you're sort of penned in to this career, and like, every single decision, like, at the same time, I say strategy is important, but also when you zoom out, strategy is less important. Like it's a matter of time scales. So I don't know, if you're feeling stressed, don't be.
You might say he's running the marathon.
He is. He's a great conversation. If you're interested in our interview with him, go into Svelte Radio. Mark Volkman, I think he was 3 episodes ago.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, like when you've talked to people who've done this job for 20 plus years, then you really get some perspective that you don't have when you talk to a bunch of bootcamp grads.
yeah, definitely. 2 questions specifically on the career ladder.
Yeah.
So Ian, who's in here, asked, my supervisor is currently designing a career ladder for my department at work. We don't have any job levels or advancement, so he is building it from scratch. What advice do you have for making this advantageous for the workers?
Oh, I mean, you should. Well, so obviously, there's an existing literature that you should base on, because you don't have to invent everything from scratch. You can just kind of base on all these ladders, and I've collected them for you. As far as I know, this is every single public ladder in existence. People have come back and added to my list over time, and you can just take your poison. That said, if you want to get involved and kind of skew the criteria towards things that you're already strong in, that's obviously going to be very beneficial for you. So I think it's kind of self-evident that, like, if you get to be part of the process, then you get to write the rules of the game, and you might as well write it. You might as well try to get involved so that you set the rules up in your favor. It's really not more. It's not deeper than that. It's a little bit of like Game of Thronesy. Like if there's competition to do it, there usually isn't, because people kind of usually view career ladders as irritating formality, but they are necessary, and companies kind of view that as a form of leadership, and take that as practice, right? Practice when it doesn't matter, so that the one day when you are that engineering manager or you are that founder and you're being asked to do a career ladder, you've done it before.
Awesome. The other question that came through, oh, by the way, if you check on Slido, I just posted the link to career ladders on the sidebar there on the left. So you can jump onto there. I'll post it into Slack later as well.
Yeah, it's in loose chronological order, and there's definitely groups of schools of thought. So like Rent the Runway was very influential, and they influenced a bunch of other companies. And then like Spotify is super weird. If you want to go like the like I have no idea what goes on in this company, and Spotify is like the classic example.
I do like their idea of the graph that they post with about autonomy, but that's general in a lot of different companies.
Yeah.
That's where I first ran into it, was from Spotify.
Yeah. Oh, Hacker News loves this one. Using big O notation for the levels.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So the other question is, as far as I know, there are no junior entry software engineers in my company. I'm one of the 2 software engineers. The rest are senior engineers. I do not know our company's career ladder. Should I ask or let the cards fall where they may and hope they see my growth?
How big is the company? Do we know?
I don't know.
Yeah. Typically it's fine to not have ladders when in a company smaller than, let's say, 40 to 50, because everyone kind of knows everyone. And it's beyond that certain point where, so the reason I picked 40 to 50, there's some science to this. I forget the exact math, but essentially like the maximum ratio that a single manager should have to an engineer is 5 to 8 engineers per engineering manager. And then if you scale that up, if you want to have a manager of managers, then 5 to 8 managers or teams, that gets you to the ballpark of 40 to 50. And so the idea is that that's around the point where the person at the top of the organization stops being able to know everyone on an individual basis, and you need to have some way to scale everyone and quite honestly evaluate everyone fairly, but because otherwise you just have favoritism and all that. It's an implicit bias. Okay, so
the clarification came in. They said big company, more than 30 engineers.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's some point where it's uncomfortable. Like I went through it with Netlify. It's uncomfortable where you have to start implementing career ladders and be leveled, but ultimately it's going to be beneficial for you because having gone through that process and establish that process, you'll be able to be more confident when communicating your seniority to other engineers, to other companies when you inevitably apply for the next job. So I think that's fine. Well, I mean, I don't know about the advice. Like, just get involved. Offer. I've done the research for you. Just go read through a bunch of these and like pick out what you like, and then suggest that. They'll probably say yes because it's very hard to come up with these from scratch. And just make sure it's a game that you want to play. Set yourself up for success. I think one thing that is very consistent that no matter whether or not you have an engineering ladder or not. I think having a brag sheet, this is what Julia Evans calls a brag sheet. Julia Evans brag document, I think. Yeah, brag document is very advantageous to you. So again, I jot that in the link in there. And this again, independent of the ladder, you should have an idea of like what your best accomplishments are, some numbers and some anecdotes and some people, like some source documents, and just have that at the tips of your fingers so that when there are two ways to do this. When you're called on to summarize your accomplishments, you often, it's not going to be at like you're not going to have preparation. Like they're not, a lot of the times it just comes up in a casual conversation. And if you can rattle it off, you seem a lot more confident and you seem a lot more accomplished. And most people cannot do that. So you have a relative advantage if you do. Okay. And the second thing is to have that ready so that you make it easy for your manager to be your advocate, right? To advocate for your promotion or just like to be able to brag about you. So if you make it easy for them, then they will do it more. So I think this is a really good idea. My one twist on this idea of having a document is to not have a document and to just have a Slack channel where I just have, I'm the only member of the Slack channel, and I just drop in anytime I do something good, I just drop it in. So I have like this reverse chronological order of things that I've done, which I'm proud of, and I would like to be able to pull up easily in the future. So that's an independent good habit, independent of what your ladder is. But you can obviously mark things like, okay, this is an example that I want to bring up in the future where I did collaboration and I handled disagreement well. boom, that's my story, right? Like, and I have the timing, and I have the dates, I have links, I have receipts, whatever it is. Just make it easy for yourself. And literally, like, this is the way that we get hired at Amazon as well. Like, if you go through like the leadership principle hiring process, tell me about a time when you handle disagreements well. Boom, boom, right? Like, you should try to have that available, and then try to tailor it to whatever your ladder is.
That's really good. And something that I've just learned recently that I've been putting into practice. To your question, should you just let the cards fall and see if you'll be noticed? I would say that's on a large team like you're on, you're probably not going to be noticed unless you are making somewhat of an effort towards that. So towards advancing your career, my advice would be similar to Sean, that, track your accomplishments, be communicating what you're doing. I've managed teams before, and it's really hard to keep track as your manager, even if there's only 5, 6, 7 people that you're managing. It's really hard to keep track of every single little accomplishment. So when it's time for me to go to the management team and say, okay, should we give this person a raise? Now I have to think back over the last 6 months or the last year
It's
and
so
try.
hard.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. So if you have that kind of brag document or history, if you've been communicating that, you'll be a lot more noticed than if you hadn't. And it's not,
but like,
usually it's not malicious. Like your
it's not.
manager isn't gonna just not bring up your accomplishments. It's just the nature of being human.
Yeah, exactly. Well, also, the other thing I wanted to respond to is this idea that you have to be noticed within your company. It's like, notice me, senpai. And like, that's so pathetic. I'm sorry. Like stop, have more agency in your life. I don't know, like, it's great, right? Like, obviously your manager, should be your biggest advocate and whatever. But like, at the same time, like, work on your industry connections outside, and always have a backup plan. Like, what if your manager just sucks? Like, are you out of luck? Like, no, like, you do need a backup plan, and you do need a longer term game that you're playing. So I'm sorry, I don't actually mean pathetic, but I was just like, like, it's so passive, and I always want engineers to have more agency over their lives, right? Like, don't let things happen to you like you happen to companies. And I think you may not feel like you're there yet, especially starting out this early in your career, but you definitely have a lot of power, and it's up to you to take control of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was a great reframing. I love it. The next question says that they asked, my work mentor asked me to set aside 2 hours a week to learn things on my own. First of all, that mentor is awesome, and that needs to happen more in the industry. There's so much out there that I don't know where to start. Do you have any recommendations on what to focus on and learn more about?
Interesting. So I like this idea of a minimum spanning set of tools. So what that means is that you should be able to have like a toolkit that you can take to solve any problem. A lot of people have this conception of what that toolkit is. So for example, people like to say that you should have a systems language, a scripting language, whatever, like a compiled language, like, that minimum spanning set of like 3 or 4 different languages. Or it might be like, you should know your framework, and then you should know your state management libraries, your animation libraries, whatever it is. Like, it really depends what part of the stack you're working with. So I like that. I like saying like, let's just be really confident in like one set of tooling before we just go out and go nuts with all the other stuff. Because like, there's too much. Like, you will never learn everything. You'll like, a lot of people. I made this mistake when I finished my boot camp. I surveyed all my my fellow students, and I was like, "Oh, what are you gonna learn after graduation?" And I had all these categories which are so ambitious, and people will pick things like cryptocurrency or like machine learning, and they'll never get there. Like, if it's not a focus of yours, you'll never get there. Like, I much rather you just like focus and just be great at like everything that you use currently, and just be able to do anything. And like, whenever you had that, in that 2 hours, if you ever had that feeling where you're just like copying and pasting stuff and not really knowing what's going on, take those 2 hours and just go back and just go like, all right, I'm going to read the source code and just really understand from a ground up basis. Like I could write this myself if I wanted to. That's a really solid foundation that I think a lot of people trying to skip because they feel like they're, you know, they want to go for breadth, but just having that good depth really makes you a solid engineer and gives you that return on experience. Like that 2 hours that you spend, it's going to help you with the remaining 38. And I think that's a good idea. The other thing I would say that like once you're happy with your like your minimum spanning set of tools, however you define it, then we're talking about like what else is on the horizon, right? Like being able to introduce new technology into your company helps you become the tech lead for whatever migration is done in future. And a lot of it comes from understanding the new trends and keeping up to date with the latest trends. So being able to try out things and build proof of concepts and demo examples. One example I can give you for this is a friend of mine, Zach Argyle. He worked at Pinterest and he was like really interested in this idea of progressive web apps. So he actually worked on a hackathon. Like I think it was like 4 hours. So it wasn't 2 hours, but it was 4 hours. He like made a Pinterest hackathon and presented it to the CEO. And then like it had so much compelling performance metrics that within the next 2 years they converted Pinterest into a PWA based on his work, and now he manages the React Native team. That kind of thing, like that's a compelling thing. Like it's like, all right, we have no time within our regular day to try this technology, but this 2 hour period I can like do R&D and show that this is a potential future direction for the company. That's the kind of thing that can make your career. So yeah, that's hopefully those are good ideas for you.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I had kind of a similar experience at my previous job where I just took a weekend and I wanted to learn a new something new that had just come out. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I built like a history tracker for our product. So someone could hit the slash key and a little pop down would come up and see the history of where they've been. And it was just a surprise to my manager, like, oh, look what I built over the weekend. And he loved it. And we rolled it out and I learned something cool. And the caveat to that is be careful with surprises like that, because sometimes managers are like, well, you had time to do this in the evening, so why didn't you work on this problem that you're bringing on the daytime? So you kind of have to know the team. But yeah, I like that idea of, you know, get good at that tool, maybe spend that time to work on something newer as well, but get really good at what your tool belt is.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to handle that. Those are only two, but hopefully those are good ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Ooh, this is a really good one. With your tacit knowledge pyramid and explicit knowledge, how do you decide if something is worth writing down? Tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge.
I have a good rule of thumb. It took me like 2 years to get this, so you're getting the benefit of this. Anytime you refer to it more than 3 times in person to a friend or to in conversation, so it's this idea that like you should not write down everything you know, right? Because that's just way too much. But you should write down more than you're probably writing down today. So what's your buffer is you just use a reference counter, right? Like, all right, this is the first time I referenced it and I didn't have a good link to send someone. All right, that's good enough. And then, oh, second time, still didn't have a good link. And when you hit the third time and you're like, oh, you know, this is something where I know well, and I've explained this often enough and tested it on people. People like it. I like it. I like talking about it. I should write it down. The third time, I think, is a really good cutoff point for ideas.
That's a really good rule. I like that a lot. And eventually you'll be able to use Google, as you just did, for, oh, we're talking about this idea. Let me Google my own blog. Here you go. Very can't see Daw-ish.
I mean, also, it turns out that it's actually a very good SEO strategy, because when you've tried to find the thing and you can't find it, or it doesn't say it in the way that you would agree with, or using the words that you agree with, or you just don't think like the existing resources explains it well, then you're basically, when you write things down, you're kind of filling a hole in the internet. And Google's like very well Google on social media is just very well set up to send people your way who are like you, who respond to the same mindset that you have. And I think that's by the way, like that's a lot of the value add that people, especially from boot camps or like recent engineers, can bring by learning in public, because you have the beginner's mindset and you're not burdened with knowledge, as people say. So yeah, write more things down. Try to market test things if you can, but also like don't get too banged up about it if you don't. One of my recent posts actually did really well. It's called the light and dark side of the API economy, and it summed up a lot of these disparate ideas that I kept linking to all over the place. So sometimes people are like, oh, I don't have enough time to write. Like how do I make time? I have so many other things going on, but it really saves you time if you can sum up all these ideas in like the definitive doc that you can just send it anytime in the future. Because like if you mention it 3 times, you're probably going to mention it more times in the future. So you might as well just go read this article. Like let me know if you have any questions. Obviously that can be a bit rude, so don't do it too much. But it's really nice to have the complete collected thoughts, because then not only do you have that resource to send people, but you just sound smarter because you wrote stuff down before, and you just sound more articulate. Yeah, it's just like a great thing to have.
Awesome. Well, we are at our scheduled time. There are quite a few more questions, and I'm happy to send these to you, Sean, or we internally can answer them. If you have time to stick around and want to stick around, we can do that.
I got 30 minutes. But also I wanted to drop the referral link if people want to check out the book. Fiwa's already bought some. I think he's going to run like a giveaway or something. Mm-hmm. But for those who want to buy it for 50% off, because I love bootcamp students, I just dropped it in the chat. And yeah, I can stick around for another 30 minutes.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for that link. That's huge. I know, like you said at the beginning, you're not here to sell your book. What I've noticed as I've followed you over the years is you are all about your principles, learning in public, giving back. You back that up with your actions, and I really appreciate that about you.
Yeah, I like to say that like a quarter of my stuff is already free online. But also sometimes people need to pay to take things more seriously.
Value it, yeah.
It's kind of like Lambda School, right? Like you could technically string together your own education just from like free resources online, but then you pay Lambda School to help you guide through it. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I don't know if I just compared myself to Lambda School. I don't know. Anyway,
hey, it's a good comparison. Well, yeah, thanks for sticking around a little bit longer. The next question we have is, how did you decide? Oh, we just did that. Next question is, are some companies just better at helping employees move from junior to senior? If so, how can an applicant tell?
I don't honestly know the answer to that question. That's a tough one.
Tough question, yeah.
I've heard, and this is indirect advice, but like I've heard that you could just basically say like the person. So a really good, like I like collecting questions that you can ask during interviews, like that. There's a repo out there called the reverse interview where we collect all these questions. So a really good question to ask is, if you're filling a spot that was vacant, like where have people who've been in this position gone on to do, what have they gone on to do, right? Like have they gone on to do great things? Have they been promoted internally? It's great to hear those stories. The only thing that you should be realistic about is that you're just not going to have that large of a sample size. You're really extrapolating from like an N of like 3 or 4. Like that's it. Like you're not, there's nothing scientific here. And it's very much dependent on like your manager, if you have a learning and development team, then your learning and development team. That's about it, like, so you can ask around more and certainly, but yeah, you're not going to have that much info before you join. And a lot of times you just find out when you've joined, what kind of company it is. Yeah, that's just the way of things.
Yeah, and I think places like, what's the website that you can leave a review on a company?
Glassdoor.
Glassdoor. You can do a little bit of research. It's not going to give you that full picture, but
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, what kind of person is motivated to leave a review on Glassdoor? There's two kinds. One is the disgruntled employee who had a bad experience, and then the other one is the people who have been prompted by HR. Hey, our Glassdoor has not been updated in a while. Can you go leave something on Glassdoor? And people do that. That's illegal. That's against their terms of service. But let's just say that it's not very well enforced.
yeah, definitely. What would you say are the biggest or most important signs you are ready to think about aiming for a senior position? Any advice on fairly evaluating and staying cognizant of your own competence? I imagine learning in public would be huge. This is from Edward on here.
Great question, Edward. Wow. Jesus. There's some amount of Dunning-Kruger effect. So for those who haven't seen the chart, everyone's seen the chart. All right. Look it up if you haven't. Obviously, I'm not going to assume anything, but there's a lot of times people actually overcompensate on the other angle, because the more it's when you first learn something, you think like you can do everything, and then the more you know, the more you learn about what you don't know, right? So it's more likely that people underestimate what they already know, and underestimate themselves. That said, there's always exceptions, and there are people who are also overconfident. So it's hard to tell. Having good friends that can just tell you the way things are is really nice, so they can serve as a reality check. I think the other thing that is helpful is also doing teaching, like volunteering to teach a workshop, like even internally within a lunch and learn. Or like I've done conference teaching at a workshop. I've done workshop teaching at a conference where you basically lead a class for 4 hours and people just throw questions at you. If you can get through that, you know your material. Yeah, like so I think having reality checks is good. I think, but all that is independent of this idea of like, am I senior yet? And honestly, I think that it's in your benefit to just try as often as reasonable to get that designation, because that's kind of like the like you have like some official blessing now, because everyone hires senior engineers. So I don't have more collected thoughts on that. This is a new question to me, so thank you for asking that.
Watch for a blog post coming soon.
I know. I got to stew on this. I have a lot of like work in progress blog posts, which is the mise en place writing idea that I skipped over. But yeah, this will go in there, and then maybe I don't touch it for another year, but I'll be thinking about it.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and I don't know that I can pinpoint a time in my career where I said I'm a senior developer. It is a good one.
I mean, I keep coming back to this idea of independent execution, and then also mentoring others. So if you do that and people keep coming back to you, then that's a sign that you're doing something right. So just keep doing that and you'll be recognized, I think.
They have to come back to me because they signed their ISAs.
Mm-hmm.
Just kidding. No, I like that as kind of a rule to watch. The next question we have: do you advocate for yourself to attain a senior status or be acknowledged as one as you move up in the same company? So kind of a little bit on the same line there.
Both?
Yeah.
Why do you have to choose? Yeah.
You kind of advocate through something like a brag document. I should be, at this level now, and then your company acknowledges that, and you move up in the company.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, there's some measure of bias here as well. For sure, if you're part of an underrepresented group in tech, you do need to advocate for yourself more, because there's just a lot of implicit bias in how these things are done. Actually, Pinterest is one of those examples that came up over the summer, I think, that had a really, really bad case of this, where the women involved were literally like, they just assumed they were being paid for their experience and their contributions the same as the guys, and they were not, which is not. And I mean, it's really unfair, and it's really like I don't know how to fix this, right? Like, but it's just a fact that this happens, and you got to fight for yourself.
Do you have advice for people who want to transition to a freelance shop like Gun.io or TopTal that are coming from non-traditional background?
So they don't care about background so much as where you've worked, particularly TopTal. Well, okay, sorry, I'm going to modify that. So TopTal prides themselves on like a really rigorous test. Okay, first of all, disclaimer is being that I have never done any of those. I've never worked through any of those services. I got accepted in interview with the G2I network, and I was technically on there for a while, but I just don't like the idea of freelancing. A little bit too unstable for me. But that said, like, people can have the flexibility, and actually sometimes they make really good money on that. So a lot of times, like, people don't care about so much about background as much as, do you pass their supposedly rigorous tests, or do you come from a FANG, like a well-known company, so they can just say like, we give you X Y I think there is like a XY company in a recruiting agency, or they're like X FANG agency, stuff like that. So I personally don't have advice on that. I have a couple friends who do. So Kelly Vaughn has her book on freelancing, as well as I would recommend people to Corey House. Let me just type in these people: Kelly Vaughn, Corey House. They've just got really good advice on freelancing and independent life as because they've done it. So I would send you to them, and yeah, that's all I would say.
I tried it, and I didn't. I'm on the same line. I didn't enjoy it.
I mean, look, like I have friends that I check in regularly with, and they're like, yeah, we come in, we like solve the hard problems, and then we leave and solve other interesting problems at other companies. That actually is somewhat compelling compared to like the drudgy like maintenance work sometimes that you might be doing. So I have sympathies with that. I also have heard of stories where people just work for 6 months of a year, and then the remaining 6 months they just travel, and that's really nice. I think honestly, like, this is the kind of thing that you should do when you're kind of more established and people come to you, because then you can charge a more premium rate as a consultant rather than a freelancer. Yeah.
I've recently applied to a position at a company that describes itself as having a flat management structure.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of that? And do you have any thoughts on upsides or downsides of flat management?
Of course I've heard of it. Of course I've heard of it. I don't know. I think it's a pretty common thing. Netflix famously only has senior engineers. They don't have junior engineers. They don't have super senior engineers. They just have senior engineers. It's like this idea of like a hierarchy that I don't know. Like, there's always like an informal hierarchy. We're inherently hierarchical creatures. So when you deny something and it just happens anyway, I don't like that double speak. But I mean, it's nice that everyone wants to work on a more egalitarian level, and I don't know. I like the idea. I just haven't worked in one, so I can't really speak to it.
Yeah, I don't think I have either. But yeah, Netflix is interesting because it's not like, there's less of that career ladder and more just you're there working on what you're working on with your team.
It is somewhat BS, right? Like, even if you look at the Valve, so Valve is a famously non-hierarchical place, and if you read through the Valve handbook, which is also available online, they're like, Gabe Newell, who's like the founder of Valve, is, everyone's not your boss, but Gabe is the most not your boss. Like,
Yeah.
wink, wink. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, we have just, like, in the absence of hierarchy, we'll just like form our own like informal cliques. Like, it's like, it's the same as high school. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and it would seem to me that a situation like that would be even harder for underrepresented groups, because that hierarchy is going to form. And let's say
Yeah.
you're a woman in that company, you're going to have to push even harder than like an outgoing man
Yeah.
to
Well,
get that position.
I'm always a fan of like just whatever the situation you're being dropped in, you should have the feel the right or the responsibility or the have the permission to advocate for yourself the best,
Hmm.
because you there's everything else you kind of cannot control. So no matter what, you're just gonna have to uh, look out for yourself anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've just got 2 questions left. Thanks again for sticking around with us. This next one, well, I'll do this one first. Is it better to move from junior to senior or junior to self-employed?
uh, I don't think there's a clear better or worse there.
It,
Or
it
just
seems
yeah,
very situational.
yeah. Look, like if you can if you do well as a self-employed person, then it's great for you as well. But also a lot of people end up not doing that well at self-employed, and really like the senior. I mean, being a senior engineer is a very lucrative field, and we I think, you know, comparative to a lot of other high-paid professions, I think we're treated relatively well. And I say this having come from finance. Um, so don't. Um, I think there's a very strong, especially in social media. I think there's a very strong like quit your job mentality. Like, you can make it you can make it independently. Um, like I don't know, just don't forget what you have.
Yeah.
Don't throw it away for something. But I mean, that said, I do know a lot of very very happily self-employed people. So different strokes, different folks. That would be my answer to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last question. I really like this one. Any advice on avoiding or recovering from burnout? I've been putting in a lot of effort to perform well at my current position, but I have recently realized that I have been stuck in a state of brain fog, and my productivity is dropping, and it is taking more effort to do the same work.
Yeah, sorry about that. I haven't experienced that um, that much on the coding side, but I have on the writing side. And I mean, that's actually part of what I ended with in the discussion, right? Like the uh, why it's important to keep your drive so that you can stay in the game. And I think that's like the most important thing, apart from all the other fancy stuff, that you should try to keep your enjoyment of coding. And yeah. So um, the advice that I've seen, and I can send you the links for those threads, because there's a lot more than I can give you here. But the advice that I've seen is to work on work on causes that you care about. So a lot of times, like you might have this fog because you're just kind of doing what you think you're supposed to be doing, like what others expect you to do. But if you can apply that towards like a relative, like a I don't know, just a cause, like homeless, or like some political cause that you really care about. Um, that can sort of spark your your love again, because you're applying your code skills towards something that you really care about. And yeah, I don't know why I'm just repeating myself, but like having being a part of something bigger than yourself, I think is just really important. And I think that's fun. Um, I can tell you what works for me is that I like being a part of history. So a lot of what I do is trying to be on the cutting edge of what I think the future of tech is going to be like. So I love engaging with the maintainers and authors of like the new frameworks, the new libraries, and seeing what their vision can get to, and helping them to convey that, and to uh, to, to to translate what I see to the people uh, that read my work. And so I like that, like being a part of like everything. We all just, little specks in like the broader, galaxy of like what's going on in the world. But I think if we can step out of ourselves and just kind of look at what's going on out there, and then make sense of that, I think that's a really fundamental core like human desire to like to have something mean something, to make meaning in the world. And so that drives me personally quite a bit. But yeah, it's gonna be very personal for you. I'm gonna try and pull up the links for the burnout stuff that I found, because there's a lot more advice from people who've actually gone through burnout. So I don't want to overstep my boundaries here.
Oh, I think that's
what advice do you have? I think we should pitch in a few more. I don't think I handled that very well.
no, I think you did great. I think having that purpose, having that drive, I really like your idea of finding what are your principles, and having that as part of keeping that drive. I think too, giving yourself permission to to stop work at a certain time every day, to make sure that you're not doing too much. I totally understand, because I was just there too a few years ago. You're at the beginning of your career, you want to perform well, you want to show yourself. So give yourself permission to scale back if you need to. Work on, maybe spend some of that energy advocating for yourself, rather than just heads down all day long in your code trying to be noticed. Maybe advocate for yourself, learn how to do that, and spend some energy on that. That way you don't need to push and push and push to be noticed. You can do what is expected, do it well, and then advocate that, rather than going the extra mile every single day, every single week. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, for sure. Just taking a break from coding is often a good thing to do. Yeah.
And holidays help. This November, December is kind of a hustle time, but also like you get, most tech companies, you get 1 or 2 weeks off during this time. So hopefully, if this alumni is still on, hopefully you take advantage of that, and really take that break, step away from your computer, and recover a little bit.
Like, people make the nicest things for their significant others and their relatives. Like, I saw someone make a game to propose to their wife, and it was just fun. It was like a little RPG that they made, and I'm sure they had zero burnout doing that. It's just great.
Yeah.
And it's all part of, like, break out of that little loop that you might be stuck in. And yeah.
My family, my extended family, my siblings and parents have been, we've been doing Mandalorian watch parties every Friday.
Oh, it's so good. Everyone needs to watch it. I don't care. It's compulsory for your coding career. I don't care.
Star Wars, everything. So a couple weeks ago, we were kind of having trouble like lining up our schedules. So I just built a little web app that said, "This is the countdown. Here's when we're watching." Gave it to everybody. It plays the Mandalorian music in the background, and yeah, it was like that 2 hours went by so fast because I just was having fun.
I mean, honestly, like, yeah, actually at a previous company, like I built like a little UI layer for my sales people, because they were just having so much trouble with Salesforce, and they loved me for that. They were like, "You're amazing. You're so smart." And it just felt so good, even though it was like a 2-hour job. And it's just nice to like flex what you have and then give it to people who like don't have it, and just remind yourself that you do have superpowers, and this is awesome. You worked hard for it, and yeah, you're in a good spot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Sean. We really appreciate you joining us today. And how can alumni reach out to you? What's your, Twitter tag, Swix, right?
Exactly. I'm currently locked out, not because I like broke any rules. I just like, I look like a bot because I have a US number and I'm based in Singapore. I'm trying to fix it. But you can find me on my site, swix.io. And I have my email is swix@hey.com. So you can definitely email me your questions. I do run a community for the book. So if you want to have extended conversations with everyone else reading the book as well, basically it's like it's one of those things where like I'm trying to do this where like I'm accessible to everyone, but I'm especially accessible to people who, want to discuss the book, right? Like, because that's something I want to work on for a long time. Like, this is the first year I put it out, and it's only like there's already so many things I want to change about it. Like next year I'm going to put out a new version and just like keep iterating on it, kind of like I iterate on myself. So I just invite you to come along with me on this journey. But even if you don't, you can just see my writing online and connect with me there.
Yeah, thank you very much. The real secret, if you haven't found it out by now, to becoming a senior developer is neon background lights.
Yes, very very crucial.
Yes.
This is like $11 on Amazon. It's great. It's a nice hack. But although I think it's a little bit conformist now because like everyone's doing it. So the more non-conformist thing to do is just to reject it and just go like harsh, like bright lights like that. Like
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Sean.
Thank
have
you.
a wonderful morning in Singapore and have a great afternoon, everybody else.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you. Bye.